Hello everyone, my name is Torrin Hopkins and I am in your computational perception class. I'm going to give you a proposal for exploration on a topic of the mechanisms of the cortex, a framework for learning. So my initial idea application is sort of a extension of some work I've been doing for a hospital system here in Chicago. I'm going to talk a little bit about the cortex and the brain and Jeff Hawkins and his thing on intelligence, his nice book. So we're also going to be talking about memory, basically because it's a topic of great debate. It's studied by many great researchers such as Dr. Christoph Cook, Jeff Hawkins, Jack Groh. There's a whole lot of people, obviously, who study this and have been talking about memory and the hippocampus and the cortex and basically what is memory? How can we think about it? So the need, there's a big need, obviously. We want to know this because of medical issues like Alzheimer's and obviously to make computers more intelligent in order to replicate maybe some of the computational power of the brain. Our lives rely on the accuracy of our memories, the accuracy of the memory of our computers as well. And it's also hotly debated in the courtroom. For instance, if you don't remember a specific event or a scene or something of that nature, it's hard to use that information as the truth or falsity or something like that. So false memory also sort of falls under this. Implications for culpability in a legal situation, obviously, and understanding just basically how we function biologically and socially because we're governed by this big computer. So the related work that's in association with this has to do with basically four things here, four topics, which are the cortex, the hippocampus, memory as a topic, and sort of attention. And I'm sort of drawing on Jeff Hawkins's ideas of the cortex as this massive computational sheet that processes information in a hierarchical fashion. And I'm also looking at the hippocampus as sort of operating at the pinnacle or the very tippy top of that. So another really important concept to grasp is fire together, wire together. It's also known as Hebbian learning, which basically means that any connection that's made, and whenever one cell fires, and then by default activates another cell, that cell's also going to fire. So, and when that happens, the process is enhanced and strengthened. So now we have the cortex, which is essentially the big computational sheet here that's layered in 6 layers here. They're discrete layers and they're organized in a hierarchy. What we mean by a hierarchy is just that, let's say, like your eyes, you'll receive information from the nerves, and we'll call it V1, has all of these little tiny pixels here that maybe will detect if it's a straight line, curved line, whatever. All of that information will converge over here that maybe tell you that it's a circle, and this information along with all these other neighboring informations that came from here may converge on some other higher concept. So this is like maybe lines, this is maybe circles, this is maybe something else, and this is maybe like facial features, and this is face or something. I don't know. The point is that it's a hierarchical fashion, and that it's very much so studied like that. So you can sort of see how they'd be stacked up, and sort of information is conducted down and up these things. They're represented in different ways here. You're probably familiar with this sort of grid. Okay. So the motor cortex, more specifically, is this line or this region of cortex which has direct output to the spinal column, which goes ahead and moves any one of your muscles. So it initiates physiological processes that move muscles and do things and create behaviors and do anything you want to do, basically. Yeah, notice that it's right here, and that if you recognize that the cortex as being this big ubiquitous sheet here is actually folded in and of itself, so the layers here are only really talking about like one like convolution, or like one little section of that would have all of these layers, we'll call it. Okay, and then that big sheet is folded. So what's the hippocampus? Well, the hippocampus is a big area of study because of this one patient actually called HM. He had epilepsy within these lower brain regions, and it was causing a debilitating epileptic episodes for him, and they had it resected back in like the 50s. He actually lived into old age, but it was this terrible repercussion that basically meant he couldn't learn any new explicit memory. And what I mean by explicit memories is he couldn't form new concepts. So say every time he looked in the mirror, it would probably surprise him as to why he was another day older or a few years older. After a few years would be the case. And he couldn't learn anybody new, but he could get better at baseball. Okay, so he could, without knowing he ever played it or had played it yesterday or the last 50 days in a row, his swing could get better. Okay, and they measured that through like drawing things and stuff like that. Now, the hippocampus itself is also known to be part of things like spatial reasoning, and other patients have also been demonstrated to have that since HM, like Clive Waring, who you may have studied in a psychology class or something. And yeah, questions of how the hippocampus can be doing both spatial, conceptual, time-related, maybe even forming new memories is all part of the mix right now, and it's very much so debated. Okay, so here's sort of a map of the connections of the brain, if you will. And it's kind of fun to note that the hippocampus is at the very top. This is the entorhinal cortex. I just wanted to point it out because people studying the entorhinal cortex won the Nobel Prize last year and actually presented at the Society for Neuroscience this year as the keynote speaker, which is cool. All right, so again, what is memory? And memory has this sort of split crowd. Scientists are not at all on consensus on this. There's people who think about it as more of a recall associated, like modern computers, or more like memory retrieval, like your brain will be sort of searching for the actual memory and then find it and then pull it back, and sort of this very computer-like operation. And people who are in this field are scientists refer to processes like memory retrieval or cell specification, like the Halle Berry cell or the Bill Clinton cell, or the, some famous person that you've seen all the time, that you have all these concepts that sort of come together to form this person who've converged on the cell that is now designated for Halle Berry or whoever the heck the famous person is. So the second group has yet to define mechanisms for operation of a memory model as part of a global system outside of just the physiological functioning of that cell itself having memory. So Hawkins sort of addresses this in the book, and he sort of talks about the cortex as being this massive computational sheet, and sort of the underpinnings of memory would fall within the operations of the computer of the cortex itself. And sort of what the cortex is used for and how it's built actually has memory sort of built into it as a function of its biological significance. So what's attention? Attention is actually important here because it's studied at the top of the hierarchy, we'll say. There's two different kinds of attention. We'll call it bottom up and top down. Bottom up can be thought of as sort of like the loud noise that you hear drawing your attention, and then you can think of the top down as sort of like I'm trying to control my mind to focus on something even though there is loud noises or whatever. So there's sort of this higher process that might be occurring maybe in the frontal regions, and then this bottom up that's occurring in the more sensorial regions, converging on maybe some area in here. The parietal lobe is more for the sensorial, and then the frontal lobe would be more for this longer planning type behavior or processing. So the approach entailed that we used a fMRI machine and studied a couple tasks. So what we had to do was isolate attention. We had to ask subjects to complete a motor task based on a motor task that entailed attention and one that entailed no attention. And then basically we measured the hippocampal connectivity to the motor cortex during that, and we're able to look at it against just an overall blood flow of the brain. Then we were able to, well, basically what we're saying here is that if attention affects the motor cortex, and then and if the hippocampus is connected to attention, that the hippocampus then affects the motor cortex even more so, and then this whole mechanism sort of creates the reformation of the cortex and what we call memory, right? So we can think of memory as being this measurable long-term reformations of the connectivity between the regions, and suggest the hippocampus is involved in forming new memories by some direct relationship to the cortex, sort of by shooting its influence back down. So theoretically, I'll be happy if attention mediates the connectivity between hippocampus and the motor cortex, and the hippocampus must be receiving highly invariant information from many of the far-reaching areas of the brains, and information must be converging from both top-down and bottom-up processes. And then we can also say that the long-term effects of the hippocampus to the affected region, or this shortcut, lead to a change in the cortex, and we can call this enhanced memory. All right, so I'll just quickly go through the evaluation methods since I think I'm about 10 minutes here. Evaluation methods, we basically used Siemens scanner, 3T, 3 Tesla is basically the measure of the magnetic strength, and then we have this head coil here. And basically what we did is we used a head coil, 12 channel. Visual stimuli were projected on this mirror here, and bold images were acquired using echoplanar imaging method. These are just basically the times that define the resolution and the intensity of any particular voxel or brain pixel, 3D brain pixel, if you will. Basically what I had to do was analyze this in SBM8 software. I've manipulated the images to some degree already by spatial realignment, co-registration, normalization, smoothing, and then basically I'm using that in order to derive the new pictures, which I'll talk to you about. The block design, this experiment was done with block design. Functional images were required over a duration of testing sequence, so that means that during this test, at one particular time frame during the test, we acquired images, and then we stopped, and then next test, next images was applied. Yeah. So more methods. We have 12 subjects basically. We did 2 finger tapping tasks. One required attention, one didn't. Measure of functional activation was was measured, and the hemodynamic response was accounted for. Then we did psychophysical interactions, or the connectivity between the hippocampus and the motor cortex. These are the new pictures that I'll be creating, which is more of functional activation, which will show all the regions of the cortex that are involved, and then you'll also have psychophysical interactions, which will show you sort of eigenvariant maps of the different regions that are associated with the function of the hippocampus. So we'll go to measuring success. If I can produce clean images, I will be ecstatic. Obviously, you know how hard it is to produce just like a Sudoku grid with red boxes in it or something. If there is significant overlap between the overall activation and the connectivity between the hippocampus and motor cortex map that I'll create when attention is involved, that would be super suggestive that the hypothesis is working and that it's needs further exploration. If there's something interestingly different about the connection between the hemispheres, that might also be an interesting point. I could definitely use some improvements by doing bilateral memory tests. Obviously, there was funding limitations and other kind of limitations that involved, and just basically if you're scanning somebody, some of these scans can take like 45 minutes or more, and if you keep people in there for more than an hour, they start to get antsy. So yeah, 3-hour tests are a no-no, and single hand, no attention required would be another thing that we'd like to do. Could always use more subjects, obviously, and then follow-up tests and long-term studies would be cool. Obviously, it would also be cool to look at a study that had actually people that were impaired, their hippocampus was impaired, and then we were able to study those guys against people who had perfectly fine hippocampus and see if the connectivity or attention influences change. We also might be able to seed the regions in the motor cortex and sort of do the inverse study, and that would be kind of cool too. So here's a short bibliography. Basically the books I've really referred to heavily throughout my creation of this process of understanding the cortex and thought. And then here's some other guys that I've pulled some papers that really, really highly represent good stuff. So yeah, look at maybe O'Keefe talks about space. That was one of like the earliest ones. And you have Christoph Cook and top-down attention and consciousness, which is basically the overall framework of it. You've got synchronization of the hippocampus and sensory motor integration. Obviously, the Mountcastle book that was referred to by Jeff Hawkins. And yeah, obviously, I'll have more for you later. So hopefully you enjoyed that, and hopefully it stimulated some of your thought. And I would definitely email me if you got some questions, because I know we probably didn't have time to ask them if you do show this in class. So yeah, thank you for your time, and really enjoy hearing from you guys and also seeing your projects. Take care.